Right now, what we've been doing is running and gunning, which the Wild West is fun, but the problem is if you bank in the Wild West and someone comes in with a gun, it's all over. Money can change the world. The power that comes with it can destroy it. I am not a fan of blockchain. I'm not a fan of these nonsensical buzzwords. The only one that I don't have a question about right now is Bitcoin. If you don't believe that 10 years down the road it's going to be more profitable than it is right now, don't buy it.
Is that like a problem?
Stay out of the market until you're educated.
Can you just briefly introduce yourself, like 30 seconds?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Zachary Reece. I'm the managing partner of Block Trade Investments, which is the first SEC and FINRA compliant private equity fund in the world as of 2 years ago. It remains that way today. We've been lucky enough to merge with 3 different institutions to now create Lotus Investment Strategies. So it's the first full service institution. So from self-directed brokerage to managed products, all the way to bullion offerings for hedging as well as withdrawal, makes everything very simple. For individuals who don't necessarily want to invest, it allows them to be able to have someone to be able to custodian their assets and ultimately secure those. And then on the other side, we want to make sure we're involved in bettering individuals from an economic and social perspective. So we've started Simply Give, which is a universal donation, fundraising, and e-commerce widget that will go to 25 different social platforms as well as your website and allow you to donate 16 different cryptocurrencies at the current time, as well as allow them to accept every fiat traditional standard that they have now.
So wait, so you can like put this widget on your site and accept donations?
Absolutely. So we're 501c compliant, so it allows them to go in, they set up their own access point. We have a CRM software on the back end which allows individuals to be able to control the code that they purchase. So for 100 euros, because we want this to be accessible to the masses. We don't want this to be an elitist mentality. And so to increase adoption, it has to be readily available. And so for 100 euros, they can go on, get a code they have for the rest of their life that allows them to accept cryptocurrency. And we walk them through the process of setting up all the accounts they will need to be able to receive it. But the brilliant part of our solution is really on the back end. Having our self-directed brokerage accounts as well as our full service institution allows us to be able to not only be custodian, but also allow them access to OTC desks and bullion solutions. So they can take their wealth either in crypto, fiat, or bullion, and we don't have to go outside of our institution or after another institution that doesn't operate the way that we would like them to.
In terms of the private equity fund side of things,
yes.
You said you're SEC and FINRA compliant.
Correct.
Right? So that means like you're investing in cryptocurrency, crypto assets that can be considered security? Or like,
it goes a step further. So SEC and FINRA is about compliance. To be compliant means that you have to pass as an alternative investment through people's compliance department. So if you're at Goldman Sachs, if you're at JP Morgan Chase, if you're a licensed representative, which I'm licensed 7 and 63 here in the US, and you're able to solicit investment, you have very harsh criticism on what you can invest in, especially individuals who are like wholesalers. So individuals who solicit projects for the traditional market, they can't just go participate in crypto. They have to put it through a compliance department and get it approved as an alternative investment, which means they have no involvement and there's no conflict of interest. And that's what we allow them to do because we utilize SEC attorneys. When we first created, our first step coming from Wall Street was the SEC and FINRA. How are we compliant? Because everybody wants to wall off the United States. The problem is it's 25% of the world's GDP. You want to shut that off, that's fine, but you're not going to have a successful economic evolution if you're going to cut out the major suppliers.
Right. So, okay, so you focus on U.S. investors?
Not only. We represent over 100 pooling groups and ultra high net worth individuals around the world. But we wanted to create an accredited institution so if you do work for a finance organization or you are licensed, you don't have to sit there and shudder in fear that the SEC and FINRA are going to come knocking at your front door. So
does that mean institutional investors or like retail investors?
Absolutely. So we only deal with sophisticated investors, which means you have to pass a rigorous compliance test set forth by the SEC and FINRA. I don't want to get into the legality, but essentially we have a document that validates you as an accredited investor. You then have to be registered with not only the federal government, but also your state because of blue sky laws that allow you to participate inside the US legally.
I just want to then back out a little bit, like ICOs, you guys you talked about ICO fundraising and
yes,
the model on the panel today.
Yes.
And I've heard you talk about it in other interviews. What's important about ICOs? What's different about them? Do we need them?
I think we need the evolution. I think the evolution from crowdsourced funding, which is people gave money and didn't expect anything in return. Because I remember the first crowdfunding platform I ever participated in was Super Troopers to get the second one made. First one I ever participated in. And that was the first time I had seen you don't have to go to a venture capitalist. You don't have to ask for permission. You can actually go and do what you want to and have individuals support you. So I think what it did was it separated power and money. And that was the important thing that ICOs have done. No longer does having money give you power in this economy, in this community. And I think that's the most important aspect because power corrupts. Money can change the world. The power that comes with it can destroy it. And ultimately, that's the focus and the evolution that it's brought about that I most admire at this point in time.
Okay. So are you guys investing in ICOs, like buying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we do seed stage all the way to mature projects because ultimately I'm going to be an advisor on the San Juan Mercantile Exchange, which will be the first SEC and compliant security token exchange in the US. And I think it's very important now that we create a hybrid because, okay, great, we pissed off the institution. That's wonderful. Now they've taken notice. You don't want to continue to piss off the giant in the room. And so what I've always said and I've always preached about ICOs is it's going to become a hybrid solution where there is going to be regulation, there is going to be FINRA and SEC compliant regulation that you're going to have to submit to. But ultimately sitting here saying that it's not a step in the right direction, I think would be ignorant.
The ICO landscape has shifted quite a bit, right?
Absolutely, it has.
Yeah, so if before you had like this more sort of, at least by appearances, like democratic model where like anyone can invest. Now you have this sort of, there are definitely, SEC compliant ICOs maybe that are only for accredited investors in the US, for example, so very wealthy individuals. Or you could have like just various KYC compliance requirements to make it so that only certain people with certain income. And like, can you sort of sketch out what the landscape looks like right now and like, is it moving in a direction that you think is healthy or not? Yeah,
so I think responsibility and accountability are starting to come into the space. That's the most important aspect. Right now what we've been doing is running and gunning, which the Wild West is fun, but the problem is if you bank in the Wild West and someone comes in with a gun, it's all over. And it's the same way here. At this point in time, what we've allowed to happen is individuals promising and not being responsible for any of the result. And so what you've seen is what every human being would ever do is self-preservation. What do you need to preserve yourself? You need monetary gain. Okay, great. Well, if I can get $50 million for a unicorn farm, I'm going to go ahead and crowdsource that. It doesn't mean I'm ever bringing it to life. And I think now what needs to be the case is you have to validate what you're doing. And I think with the input of venture capitalists, with private equity funds, with family offices, they're now calling bullshit on these projects going, okay, you think you can do this. Okay, great. We're going to give you bars and hurdles to climb over. Because that's why crowdsource funding started, is first a lack of access. So there was a bottleneck at getting in VC's office and being able to get offers and get out the door. I think what you're seeing now is we're creating a more efficient system with the input of ICOs. We're not changing it. We're just creating a ticketing system where now you go to the DMV and you know when you can come back. It's not, okay, well, we have to go into a venture capitalist office, we have to pitch them, then we have to wait for a month, then they're going to tell us if they're going to give us an offering, then we have to do it in stages. But I do agree right now with the stage approach of you have to accomplish something to get more. You can't just be given $50 million because no one needs $50 million to bring an MVP to life unless you're building it out of gold. And ultimately, I think that's been the biggest downfall of ICOs to this point is so many people have predicated success on money raised and not experience delivered. And experience, I think we've seen through time in the tech environment and the tech sphere that that's the key. What are the most successful companies? Apple. If you look at the most successful companies, Amazon, when they were competing with Barnes & Noble, it's because they brought an experience to the consumer that had never been experienced to that point. And what we have gotten lost in is admiring someone's intent and their intention and not what they actually can produce. And it's the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right, or just like admiring the result of the funding round.
Exactly right, and I think that's what a lot of these projects are predicated on is, can I hit my hard cap?
Right.
Well, that's when the work starts.
Right.
And I see all these pictures on LinkedIn, on Twitter. We raised $130 million. I don't want to hear about that. Yeah. I want to hear about what you've done with it to make a change. And I think most of us got involved in this because there was social and economic injustice around the world and no one had access to the fountain, so to speak. And so for third world nations, ICOs in their primitive state work. But it's just like in the United States. That's like saying the mortgage system works in the most primitive culture. Okay, great. But then when you open up CMOs, they're no longer going to be kosher in the marketplace that they exist in. And that's what we've reached now is a more complicated investor pool and a primitive investment system. And I think that's why you're seeing the transition that you are.
When people say the term cryptocurrency adoption, or you were just mentioning like ICOs working, different models of different ICOs working in various jurisdictions, like in various countries. And I'm curious how that relates to adoption, to this concept of adoption. People say blockchain adoption, they say crypto adoption. Can you be like as specific as possible and tell me what that means to you?
First of all, I am a fan of technological evolution. I am not a fan of blockchain. I'm not a fan of these nonsensical buzzwords because what they do is box us in. It's the same way that people said at the beginning of people not understanding blockchain, well, have you heard of Bitcoin? That's not a reference point for blockchain. It's a small portion of a code that was written in a paper by Satoshi and individuals go, oh, okay, well, it must be important. Well, I think that's the issue that we need to drive home here is education is the key. Understanding how technology is evolving. Don't just understand an aspect or a buzzword. Because I think what a lot of individuals strive for in today's shallow society is being able to relate, but not having comprehensive knowledge. And that's a disease that needs to be wiped out. We are moving towards what is going to be the greatest cost of human capital that we've ever seen, which is going to be technology becoming more efficient than a human being. And I think we're coming from a generation that's still around that was assembly lines, putting together cars with their hands with 50 people on the same assembly line. We're going to be moving towards nobody on the floor and everybody managing computers. Well, if you don't understand the technology, if you don't understand the coding, if you don't understand the languages, I mean, go to Mexico and try to work your way through the countryside speaking English. It's not going to work because you don't understand the language. It's the same way here. If you don't understand the communication within an environment, you'll never be able to assimilate into it and ultimately profit from it.
I just wanted to sort of like, specify a little bit because people will say, especially at conferences like this, like that's the goal, but what is that? What does that look like? But I mean, then on a more sort of small scale level, like I was at a dinner party recently and somebody asked me, somebody who's not in crypto, asked me, well, like what is Bitcoin even used for? Like what do you do with it? What is it? Like,
and that's the ultimate question. That's a good point. Right now there's no practical avenue to incorporate it in your daily life. And that's why we focused on developing Lotus investment strategies, was we wanted to give a debit card solution in tandem with self-directed brokerage accounts so that a mother of 3 could know that she could liquidate her Bitcoin instantaneously and pay for her groceries while she's in line. Not to sit here and go, okay, I don't have the money to invest in a volatile asset that is heavily speculative. Because I grew up with a mother who worked 3 jobs to support me. There is no way with the way it exists now that she could buy a Bitcoin and wait for it to appreciate. Now, if she could liquidate 0.01 of that Bitcoin and be able to utilize it to feed her children, then it becomes something that is a utility or a necessity in life. And as someone said on stage, necessity is the father of innovation. And until there is a necessity for individuals to use Bitcoin or to obtain Bitcoin, it's going to continue to be a niche.
Okay, so let's expand on that. How do you see that necessity developing? Like, what conditions need to be met? And even you can sort of, like, if you want, like, we can move out of the U.S. if that's not the first place, because as a lot of people have seen, like, that's not really the first place where there's a necessity. But yeah, can you expand on that?
And number one, you're exactly right. Mass adoption is through necessity out of poverty in third world countries. So in countries in Africa, in decimated economic areas like Greece, it would make sense for adoption to occur because there is no other option. It's a catastrophic situation. It's a lifeline that's being thrown to them, so to speak. However, for major developed nations, it's going to be predicated on infrastructure. Right now, we do not focus enough on building the infrastructure, and when I say that, I mean the avenues for individuals to invest, withdraw, and utilize their money within the system. And right now, there is no concentration to be able to lend. And until there is lending ability, it will not become a necessity because individuals will not want to accept it simply because large amounts of money or the individual liquidity systems that they operate in simply won't operate in crypto. And until we make that a realistic possibility, it's not going to be adopted by first world nations. And so, for example, in the US, why we created Simply Give, for example, is because we want to give people an avenue to now accept cryptocurrency without the obstruction of expensive solutions. And so for 100 euros, we want to give you the ability to accept 16 cryptocurrencies because with adoption increases value. And that's where stability is going to come from, is ultimately an individual group of institutions that agree to give it value. It's like complementary currencies that you see in foreign nations. No, it's not the same value of the dollar, but people do good deeds because they know it's going to build up and make a difference. And ultimately, it's the same way here. If we start to make a difference economically, socially, in areas that have been depressed, then I think you'll see rapid adoption because we're making an impact on the world. Until that experience starts to be felt by any major nation, then you'll see it continually used as a niche for third world countries.
Within any sort of scale, do you see, so within any type of country, I mean, or economy, do you see one currency, one cryptocurrency sort of like rising, like Bitcoin,
I mean,
for example,
I'll put it this way. The only one that I don't have a question about right now is Bitcoin. Plain and simple. It's the only one that I have not seen hacked, partially or in full, and it's the only one that I can open a masternode and verify everything myself. Until I can open a masternode and verify my transactions, what's the point of the blockchain? It's a distributed ledger. That's the whole point, is me to be able to verify where my money went and how it got there. Well, if I can't do that with multiple other currencies, then why am I going to adopt them? And at this point in time, the platform that they're predicated on, which for many are Ethereum, I have questions about their scalability. And the one thing that I will say to everyone who's watching this, who really considers investing, is if you don't believe that 10 years down the road it's going to be more profitable than it is right now, don't buy it. And I don't think there's any project that has come out in the past 12 months that you can say, no questions asked. 10 years from now, there is a demand for it based on the economy, how it's built right now. And so I think it's so important to value the few currencies that are out there that are tangible and have a utility that is important to their project success. But at this point in time, I'll be honest, anything that's predicated on Ethereum, I have major questions about.
Do you explore stablecoin projects? Like, are you interested in that?
I do explore them. That's something that's very experimental for me. Right now, security token offerings are something that I'm very confident in, simply because, again, there is an amount of regulation, there is an amount of credibility and responsibility that goes along with those projects. And I still believe in the old financial and economic principles. Those don't change just because we change the funding source. And I think that's the problem that we've started to get in, is this tug of war that technology is going to supersede finance. That's not the case. It's simply going to take a different shape, and we need to understand that.
Okay, but I mean, like stable coins, like the concept being that something like Bitcoin is too volatile to be used fully as money. Is that a statement you agree with, or do you think that it's not really, like, we don't need a stable coin?
It's something at this point in the scenario that we are currently in, we don't need a stable coin. I don't see it. Right now, this is all fuel for innovation. All of these tools, all of these tokens are tools for innovation. I don't see this as a currency that is going to overhaul the entire system in the next 5 years. I see a hybrid system where we start to accept digital currency, which is easier for peer-to-peer transactions, and I think that will start to change the banking system as it lies right now. But the only reason I believe in Bitcoin long-term is its tie-in with bullion at this point in time, and how I see it continuing being an unhackable commodity. And it's the same way that gold is a universal commodity. You can go to Iran and you can deposit gold. You can go to the US and deposit gold. It doesn't matter if you took it from Iran to the US, because it's the only asset that is not tracked. It's the same way that I view Bitcoin in this realm.
And I'm curious about your relationship to the sort of ethos behind Bitcoin originally, decentralization, decentralized cryptocurrencies, because as you know, obviously a lot of cryptocurrencies aren't decentralized. And then there's also the sort of other side of things where governments and private corporations are making cryptocurrencies that's centralized, or corporations considering it, big giants like Facebook or whatever. And what's your relationship to that? Is that like a problem, or is this part of the process?
It's part of the evolution. I mean, failure is going to breed ultimately the right solution. There are going to be 1,000, 1,000,000 failures before we get to what works. And I think right now what we're trying to do is have one success story and then predicate an entire economy on it. That's not how the world works. Ultimately, as practical use increases and functionality as well as scalability increases, then you'll start to see adoption as being a realistic possibility on a massive scale from a country standpoint. But if you're asking me today, if there is any cryptocurrency out there that should be predicated for an entire country, no, absolutely not.
My last question is just about something you guys touched on in the panel as well, which is the markets in general, and it relates to the volatility we're discussing. So, we get these relatively significant crashes or upswings or downswings or something, and in the past few months, you'll see these like dramatic headlines about them in mainstream media even. And what do you think, do you think that the way mainstream media reacts to market swings is something important for adoption, or what do you think sort of like its effects are?
I think it stunts adoption at this point in time because the narrative isn't the truth. Ultimately, they're not focusing on the innovation or ultimately the stimulation that this provides to developing economies. However, in the US, we're very self-absorbed. We only care about ourselves. So we only care about the Bitcoin price on a daily basis. And right now, we have an economy that's predicated on trading and creating value. Well, you create value by developing an economy that is functional. And right now, we're taking in a lot of money, but we refuse to create experiences or efficiency that would demand adoption in any way, shape, or form. If
there was one sort of like piece of advice that you would give a non-crypto person when they see these kinds of this kind of news, what would it be? It
would be stay out of the market until you're educated. I don't care if you see 42x, 50x returns and your best friend says something. I've seen too many people lose their life savings because they bought Bitcoin at 18,000 and they have no fiat currency right now. And ultimately, it's about education. I really urge any individual who's watching this, educate yourself, because education will be power moving forward. Gone are the times of 20% interest rates. And I think a lot of people look at the traditional economy and people don't remember how booms were created 10, 20 years ago. It was 10, 15, 20% interest rates at banks. You could set $1 million in and your retirement was taken care of. We're in negative interest rate territory. So it's time to learn the new economy, to learn new technology, and understand what you're investing in, because the money's out there to be made, but not by ignorance.
Cointelegraph. Like, subscribe, and hodl.